Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Translated by Eleanor Marks Aveling. It was an ordinary day in class when the headmaster entered, bringing with him a new student, a quiet boy dressed differently from the others. A servant followed, carrying a large desk. The class fell silent, and the headmaster spoke softly to the teacher, introducing the boy as Charles Bovary. Charles stood awkwardly at the back of the room, taller than most of the other students, his simple clothes too tight in some places. After he was introduced to the class, he went to sit. His cap, an odd combination of fabrics and shapes, sat stiffly on his lap. When the teacher told him to rise, his cap tumbled to the floor, causing a wave of laughter from the class. Flustered, Charles scrambled to pick it up, only for a boy beside him to knock it down again. The teacher, trying to calm the room, asked Charles to say his name. Nervously, Charles stammered out a garbled word, which the class echoed mockingly. The laughter swelled, but soon, with stern words and the threat of punishment, order returned. Charles was told to sit at the front of the class, embarrassed yet still and quiet, his eyes fixed on his work. He spent the rest of the day carefully writing and checking every word, eager to prove himself. Charles' life before school had been simple. His father, a once dashing military man, had married a woman with a small fortune, but had since retreated into a quiet, bitter life at the countryside. His mother, once full of life, had grown weary and stern over time, managing the household while Charles's father brooded by the fire. Charles's childhood was a mix of freedom and loneliness. He roamed the fields, chased birds, and played in the village, his mother clinging to dreams of him becoming someone important one day. She taught him to read and sing simple songs, imagining a bright future for her son. Eventually, Charles was sent to school in Rouen. There, he lived a quiet, routine life, attending classes, writing letters to his mother, and walking along the river on Sundays. Though not the brightest student, he worked steadily, always somewhere in the middle of his class. When it was time for Charles to choose a career, his parents decided he should study medicine. His mother found him a modest room and sent him meals from home, while Charles struggled to understand his dense medical textbooks. The words and ideas seemed like a mysterious world he couldn't quite grasp, but he kept going, following his routine like a horse circling a mill. Eventually, the weight of study overwhelmed him. He skipped a lecture, then another, until he found comfort in idle evenings at a local tavern, playing dominoes and savoring a sense of freedom. His studies slipped away, and when it came time for his medical exams, he failed. Charles, ashamed, confessed to his mother, who defended him fiercely, blaming the examiners. She refused to let him quit. With her encouragement, Charles tried again, studying tirelessly until he finally passed. It was a joyous day for his mother. With his degree in hand, Charles needed a place to practice. His mother found a small town called Tostes, where an elderly doctor had just left. Without hesitation, Charles took the position, but his mother believed a doctor needed a wife, too. She arranged for Charles to marry Madame Dubuc, a wealthy widow much older than him. Though she was strict and often unkind, Charles had hoped marriage would bring him more freedom. Instead, his days became more controlled than ever. His wife dictated his every move, monitored his letters, and accused him of neglect. Charles's life seemed set. A quiet man in a quiet town, bound by duty and routine. Late one night, Charles Bovary and his wife were awakened by the sound of a horse stopping outside their home. A man had come with a letter asking Charles to visit a farm called the Berthaud to set a broken leg. The journey was long, so Charles decided to leave early the next morning, once the moon had risen to guide his way. Wrapped in his cloak, Charles rode through the quiet countryside, half asleep, lulled by the gentle rhythm of his horse. The air was cold, and the fields stretched endlessly, dotted with dark shapes of trees in the soft dawnlight. Along the way, a young boy met him and led him to the farm. At the Berthaud, Charles found a large, well-kept farm. Horses ate calmly in their stalls, geese chattered near a pond, and a group of peacocks pecked at the ground. The air smelled of hay and damp earth. He was greeted by a young woman in a blue dress, Emma, the farmer's daughter, who led him to the warm kitchen, where a fire crackled and pots boiled gently. Charles went upstairs to see the patient, Monsieur Rouault, a stout man in his 50s with kind blue eyes. He had broken his leg the night before, but the injury was simple. Charles worked carefully, cutting splints and preparing bandages, while Emma sewed soft pads for the leg. As she worked, Charles noticed the delicate curve of her neck, the smoothness of her dark hair, and the way the morning light touched her skin. Loving the story. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. After treating the leg, Charles was invited to stay for a meal. He sat at a small table set with silver goblets, surrounded by the quiet hum of farm life. He spoke with Monsieur Rouault about the weather and the farm, and Emma listened silently, her lips softly pressed together, shivering now and then from the chill in the room. When Charles was about to leave, he searched for his whip and found it had fallen behind a sack of flour. Emma bent to pick it up, and for a brief moment, Charles felt the soft brush of her shoulder against him. She handed him the whip without a word. Her cheeks flushed. Though Charles had promised to return in a few days to check on Monsieur Rouault, he found himself visiting again the very next day, and then twice a week. The patient healed quickly, and Charles was praised for his skill, but he barely noticed. The visits became a welcome escape from his routine life. He enjoyed the quiet farm, the warmth of the kitchen, and the sound of Emma's footsteps on the stone floor. Back home, Charles's wife, Eloise, grew suspicious. She questioned why he kept visiting the farm, even though the patient was improving. When she learned that Monsieur Rouault had a daughter who was well-educated and graceful, her jealousy burned. Under pressure from Eloise, Charles promised he would not return to the Berthaud. His wife made him swear that he would stay away. Yet in his heart, Charles felt a quiet longing. Though he obeyed, the thought of Emma remained with him. Tensions at home grew heavier. Eloise argued with Charles's parents over money and misfortunes. The truth about her hidden debts surfaced, and Charles's father raged at the deceit. The fights left the household tense and bitter. Eloise had grown pale and tired, though she waved off concerns about her health. Then, one quiet day, as she was hanging laundry, she suddenly coughed up blood. A few days later, despite Charles's efforts, she gasped softly, and without warning, she was gone. Charles was stunned. After the funeral, he wandered through their empty home, stopping in their room where her dress still hung near the bed. He stood there in silence, lost in thought, whispering to himself that, despite everything, she had loved him in her own way, And just like that, Charles found himself alone. A quiet man in a quiet house, with only the echo of his life to keep him company. One quiet morning, old Rouault visited Charles to pay him for setting his leg. Along with the money, he brought a turkey and kind words, offering comfort for Charles's recent loss. He spoke softly of his own grief, reminding Charles that pain fades, little by little, like seasons passing. Before leaving, Rouault encouraged Charles to visit the farm again, mentioning that his daughter, Emma, had asked about him. Charles returned to the Berthaud. It was just as he had left it, calm and steady, the pear trees now in bloom. Rouault, back on his feet, bustled about the farm. He treated Charles with gentle care, speaking quietly as though the doctor himself were still recovering. For a while, Charles would smile at Rouault's stories, only to feel the shadow of his late wife cross his mind, though those moments passed more quickly now. As time went on, Charles grew used to his quiet home. He appreciated the freedom, eating when he wished, coming and going without question. His practice gained sympathy from the villagers, and with his name on their lips, his work slowly increased. Best of all, he could visit the Berthaud whenever he liked. One afternoon, he arrived to find everyone in the fields. There, by the window, sat Emma, sewing in silence. She welcomed him with a gentle smile and offered him something to drink. They spoke quietly, Emma about her time at the convent, Charles about his school days. That night, Charles replayed their conversation over and over in his mind. He imagined her life before they met and wondered about her future, who she might marry, what her days would become. The thought of her beauty and the softness of her words filled his mind like a tune he couldn't forget. He longed to ask for her hand, but found himself too afraid each time the moment came. Old Rouault, however, noticed Charles's red cheeks when he spoke to Emma. Though Charles wasn't the perfect match he'd imagined for his daughter, Rouault saw an honest man who would ask for Emma soon enough. And with the farm's debts growing, the thought of marrying Emma off seemed practical. Finally, one autumn day, Charles found the courage. As Rouault walked him to the edge of the road, Charles stammered, his words tangled and uncertain. But Rouault, with a soft laugh, said he already knew what Charles wanted to ask. He agreed to the marriage, adding that if Emma said yes, Charles would see the sign, a window shutter left open against the wall. Charles waited by the road, his heart pounding. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Then, there it was, the shutter swinging softly in the breeze. It was a quiet yes. The next morning, Charles returned to the farm. Emma blushed when he entered, her laugh a little nervous. Rouault embraced Charles warmly. They didn't speak of dowries or dates. There was time for that. But the wedding would wait until Charles was out of mourning for his late wife. As winter passed, Emma busied herself with her wedding preparations, sewing nightcaps and dresses while Charles visited the farm, discussing where the feast would be held and what dishes would be served. Emma, ever dreaming, wished for a romantic midnight wedding with torches, though Rouault dismissed the idea with a chuckle. And so, when spring came, they married in a grand celebration, with 43 guests gathered around long tables for hours, eating, drinking, and toasting the future. Emma and Charles's wedding was lively, with guests arriving from nearby towns in their best clothes. After the ceremony, a feast followed at the farm with roasts, cider, and an elaborate cake. The celebration lasted into the night with songs, games, and laughter. 2 days later, they left for Tostes, where Emma quietly stepped into her new life, the excitement of the wedding fading into the reality of marriage. Charles and Emma's home in Tostes was modest, a brick house along the road with a simple consulting room for patients, a small garden, and a bedroom with red furniture. On Emma's desk, a bouquet of orange blossoms from Charles's first wife, which he quickly threw away, stirred a quiet ache, making her wonder what would become of her own bridal flowers someday. Emma threw herself into improving the house, and Charles, eager to please her, bought a second-hand cart, proudly fixing it up for their country drives. For Charles, life felt full. He adored Emma's smallest gestures, but Emma felt a growing emptiness. The love she once imagined, grand, passionate, and all-consuming, didn't match the quiet, ordinary life she now lived. As the days passed, she found herself questioning what true happiness really was, silently searching for something more. Emma, from a young age, longed for a life beyond the ordinary. She dreamed of romantic worlds like those in her beloved stories. Secretly devouring romantic novels, she imagined herself a tragic heroine, yearning for passion and dramatic love. Even grief for her mother became a performance of sorrow. She found Charles's quiet presence a faint hope for romance. Yet, as Madame Bovary, Emma soon questioned if this calm, steady life was truly the passionate, beautiful existence she had always dreamed of. But Charles was not that man. His steady, simple love seemed too plain. His words were ordinary, his thoughts unremarkable. He knew nothing of art or music, and his contentment with their quiet life only deepened the empty space within her. Emma longed for someone who would awaken her heart, but Charles, ever gentle and pleased with his life, never noticed her silent longing. But beneath the surface, Emma felt a growing distance. Charles' routine life, the late nights, the simple meals, his careless way of speaking about his day, felt like a slow, steady fog closing in. His mother thought her daughter-in-law was too extravagant, too much wood for the fire, too many candles burned, and fussed over the household like a shadow. Though they spoke to each other sweetly, their words trembled with unspoken tension. Charles, caught between the two women he loved, was helpless. He saw his mother as wise, and his wife as flawless. When a grateful patient gifted Emma a small Italian greyhound named Jolly, the dog became her quiet companion. Sometimes Emma would wander alone through the fields near an old, abandoned pavilion. She wondered, what if her life had taken a different path? What if she'd married someone else? Someone handsome, witty, and daring like the men her old convent friends had surely wed. She imagined them now, living in towns full of bright lights and grand theaters, while she was trapped in a life as cold and small as a forgotten attic. But then, something unexpected broke the pattern of her life. An invitation arrived, a rare and thrilling escape. The Marquis d'Andervilliers had invited Charles and Emma to a grand event at his estate, Vaubyessard. The Marquis, grateful to Charles for a timely cure, had noticed Emma during a visit. He saw the way she carried herself, graceful, not like a simple country girl, and thought her worthy of such a gathering. And so, one Wednesday afternoon, Charles and Emma set off in their little cart. As the sun set, they arrived at Vaubyessard, just as the lamps in the park flickered to life, casting golden paths for the carriages rolling in. For Emma, it felt like stepping into the world she had always dreamed of, a world far beyond the dusty roads of Tostes. The chateau of Vaubyessard was a vision of elegance, sweeping lawns, marble floors, and softly murmuring guests. Emma, dazzled by the grand rooms and the warm welcome of the Marquise's wife, Marchioness, found herself surrounded by a world of silk gowns, crystal glasses, and exotic foods. The ball was a swirl of music and movement, and when the Viscount, a young, elegant nobleman, led her onto the dance floor, Emma felt the world blur. The candlelight, the spinning figures, the delicate brush of his hand against hers. For a moment, her head rested against his chest, and her heart raced, though she couldn't say why. While Emma was dancing with the Viscount at the ball, Charles was mostly on the sidelines, awkward and out of place. He didn't join the dance, partly because he wasn't graceful or confident enough to mingle with the aristocratic crowd. The night slipped away. Lanterns glimmered as carriages vanished into the mist, and Emma, leaning out of her window, clung to the fading echo of the music. Back in Tostes, the magic evaporated. The days felt duller, the gardens smaller. Each Wednesday, she counted the weeks since the ball, her heart marked by a quiet ache, a longing not for the Viscount, but for the life he represented. And so, Emma returned to her ordinary world, her soul forever reaching for something just beyond her grasp. Emma's boredom deepened. She stopped playing music, left her embroidery unfinished, and stared out the window waiting for something, anything, to change. She hoped each day would bring a new adventure, but nothing ever did. She became restless, moody. Charles, worried about her health, decided they should move to a new town, Yonville-l'Abbaye, hoping a change of air would help. While packing, Emma found her old wedding bouquet, now dry and crumbling. The once bright orange blossoms were faded and the silver ribbons worn. She tossed it into the fire, watching the flames quickly consume it, like a small symbol of her withering hopes. When they left Tostes at the month of March, Madame Bovary was pregnant. As the coach arrived, Emma Bovary stepped out first, followed by her servante Félicité and others. Her husband, Charles, had fallen asleep during the journey and had to be gently woken. They were greeted by Monsieur Homais, the local chemist, who introduced himself warmly. Inside the restaurant, the fire flickered, casting a soft glow on Emma as she warmed herself by the hearth. Across from her, a young man named Léon Dupuis, a notary's clerk, watched her silently. He was often lonely in Yonville and was glad for the chance to meet someone new. At dinner, the conversation flowed. Léon and Emma quickly found a shared love for travel, books, and music. Meanwhile, Charles and the ever-talkative Monsieur Homais discussed medicine, the town's health, and daily life. As the evening ended, Emma and Charles walked to their new home. The town was quiet, bathed in soft moonlight, the market pillars casting long shadows. Their house was not yet fully arranged, with furniture scattered about, making the space feel unfamiliar. Lying in bed, Emma reflected on how each move in her life had marked a new beginning. From the convent to marriage, and now to Yonville, she hoped once again that this change would bring something new, something better. The next morning, as Emma stood by the window, she noticed Léon, the young notary's clerk, outside in the square. He looked up and bowed, and she quickly nodded before closing the window. Léon spent the day eagerly awaiting another meeting with her. But when he arrived at the restaurant for dinner, Emma was nowhere to be seen. Still, He thought endlessly about their conversation from the night before. He had never spoken so freely with a woman before, and was amazed at how easily the words had come to him. Meanwhile, Monsieur Homais, the town chemist, became an ever-helpful neighbor to the Bovarys. He eagerly introduced them to local tradespeople and even helped Charles manage household supplies. But behind his kindness, he had his own reasons. He wanted to stay in the doctor's good graces to avoid trouble with the authorities for secretly practicing medicine. Charles, now settled in Yonville, found himself with too much idle time. His work was slow and money worries crept in. Still, he was overjoyed at the news that Emma was expecting a child. At last, the child was born, a girl. When Charles told Emma the news, she turned her head away and fainted. She had longed for a son, someone free to explore the world in ways she never could. But after some thought, she settled on a name she had once heard at a grand chateau, Berthe. One day on the way back home, Emma noticed Léon's elegant appearance, his neat hair, his well-kept nails. They talked about small things, but their silences spoke more. When they reached her home, she disappeared through the gate without another word. Léon, restless and longing, wandered alone to the hills, staring at the sky, lost in thought. Life in Yonville suddenly felt dull, except for the bright presence of Madame Bovary, who now occupied his every thought. Soon, little gestures of affection passed between them. Léon gave her small gifts, a book, a cactus, a beautifully wrapped package from Rouen. She, in turn, had a velvet rug placed in his room, a thoughtful touch that did not go unnoticed by the townspeople. Gossip spread quickly, and whispers of a secret love began to circulate. Charles Bovary remains completely unaware of the growing emotional connection between Emma and Léon. He is naive and blindly trusting, never suspecting his wife's hidden feelings. Léon longed to confess his feelings, but struggled with doubt and fear. Meanwhile, Emma, lost in her own thoughts, wondered what true love should feel like, until one day she noticed the first small crack in the world she had built around herself. It was a cold Sunday afternoon in February, and the snow fell softly over Yonville. Emma and Charles took a walk to see a new yarn mill under construction outside the village. As they wandered, Emma looked at Charles, her husband, and felt only irritation. His heavy coat, his slouched posture, everything about him seemed dull and lifeless compared to the quiet grace of the young clerk. That night, Emma lay awake, thinking of Léon. She pictured him, remembered his words, the sound of his voice, the way he looked at her. Over the following days, Emma changed. She became devoted to her home, to her daughter Berthe, and to her husband. She went to church more often, played the role of a perfect wife, and acted as though she had moved beyond foolish desires. But inside, she was suffering. Her love for Léon grew stronger, yet she buried it beneath her duties, convincing herself it no longer mattered. She wanted him to see her pain, to understand, but she also took pride in her restraint. Léon, watching from afar, felt hopeless. She now seemed too perfect, too distant, almost untouchable. He had once dreamed of winning her heart, but now he believed it was impossible. The quiet between them grew heavier each day, making Emma uneasy and moody. One afternoon, her little daughter, Berthe, came running to her, reaching for affection. But Emma, lost in thought, absent-mindedly pushed her away. The child stumbled, hitting a brass handle and cutting her cheek. Emma gasped, guilt rushing through her. She quickly called for the servant. When Charles arrived, she had already hidden her distress. "She just fell while playing," Emma said with a forced smile. That night, as Berta slept, Emma stood over her, staring at her small, innocent face. A strange thought crept into her mind. How odd, how ugly this child is. Meanwhile, Léon had given up completely. He could no longer bear the endless silence between them. He decided to leave Yonville for Paris, where new opportunities awaited. That night, he came to say goodbye. He stood in the doorway, hesitating, waiting, perhaps for a word, a look, anything to make him stay. Emma, standing by the window, felt frozen, her heart beating fast. "It looks like rain," she murmured. "I have a cloak," he replied softly. They stood there, trapped in the silence neither dared to break. At last, Léon reached for her hand, holding it for just a moment before letting go. Then, he was gone. The day after Léon's departure, Emma felt lost. Everything around her seemed dull, as if wrapped in a gray mist. She regretted not holding on to happiness when it was within reach, and the thought of never seeing him again left a deep emptiness inside her. At first, she clung to memories of him, but as time passed, they began to fade, like a fire slowly turning to cold ashes. 3 months later, a wealthy landowner named Rodolphe Boulanger arrived at the Bovary home. He had come for a routine medical visit with his farmhand, but Emma caught his attention immediately. While Charles attended to his patient, Justin, the young apprentice, fainted at the sight of blood. Emma rushed to help, loosening his collar and gently dabbing his forehead with vinegar. Rodolfo watched her closely, fascinated by her grace. As he left, a thought settled in his mind. With the right words, she will adore me. By the time he reached home, Rodolphe had made up his mind. He would seduce her. A few days later, he finds an opportunity to see Emma again by visiting her home under the pretense of checking on his farmhand, who had previously been treated by Charles. When he arrives, Charles is not at home and Emma receives him alone. Their conversation is polite at first, but Rodolphe, skilled in seduction, begins to subtly charm her. He speaks of loneliness, of love, and of how fate seems to have brought them together. Emma, though hesitant, is drawn to his confidence and romantic words. From that day on, Rodolphe starts appearing more frequently in Emma's life. He offers to go horseback riding with her, knowing that such an escape from her mundane life will excite her. At first, she resists, fearing what people might say, but the temptation proves too strong. Finally, on a warm afternoon, Emma agrees to ride with him. They venture into the countryside, away from Yonville, galloping through fields and forests. The freedom of the ride fills Emma with exhilaration. When they finally stop in a secluded spot, Rodolphe seizes the moment. He speaks passionately, declaring his love, and when he leans in to kiss her, she does not resist. This marks the true beginning of their affair, an affair filled with intense passion, secret meetings, and dangerous longing. Charles did not notice Emma's affair with Rodolphe. He was deeply in love with her and too trusting to suspect anything. Charles was preoccupied with his work and financial concerns, leaving him unaware of Emma's secret meetings with Rodolphe. Emma carefully maintained the appearance of a devoted wife, and Rodolphe was skilled at deception, ensuring that their affair remained hidden. Emma's affair with Rodolphe becomes an all-consuming passion, giving her a sense of escape from the dull routine of her life. She feels alive, convinced that she is finally experiencing the kind of love she had always dreamed of. At first, Rodolphe enjoys the thrill of seduction, but as weeks turn into months, he starts to feel trapped. Emma's love is too intense, her devotion too overwhelming. Unlike her, he does not see their relationship as something grand or eternal. Emma, however, grows bolder. She takes greater risks, leaving her home at odd hours, writing him long, passionate letters. She even begins neglecting her duties as a wife and mother, spending hours daydreaming about running away with him. Emma's affair with Rodolphe becomes a source of anxiety. She is constantly afraid of being caught and starts imagining people spying on her. Despite her fears, Emma and Rodolphe continue their affair. Emma grows deeply attached. However, Rodolphe starts losing interest. He enjoys the excitement of the affair, but is not as emotionally involved as Emma. He stops being affectionate, and his passion fades. Emma, sensing the change, tries harder to keep his love. Just as she struggles with her emotions, the town's pharmacist, Homais, unknowingly provides her with a new distraction. Monsieur Homais, eager to bring recognition to Yonville, persuades Charles Bovary to perform a groundbreaking surgery to correct the club foot of Hippolyte, the stableman at the Lion d'Or. Emma, hoping to boost Charles's reputation, encourages the operation, believing it could bring them success and happiness. Charles, despite his lack of expertise, nervously carries out the procedure with Homais' enthusiastic support. At first, everything seems fine, and Homais even drafts a newspaper article praising the surgery. However, complications soon arise. Hippolyte's condition worsens as his leg swells and becomes infected due to the device Charles had applied. Despite the pain, Hippolyte is ignored until the gangrene spreads severely. Finally, Madame Lefrançois insists on calling a more experienced doctor, Monsieur Canavet, who is appalled at the situation. He immediately criticizes Charles and declares that amputation is the only solution. The amputation becomes a major event in the village, drawing public attention. Canavet mocks modern medical experiments, dismissing Charles' attempt as foolish. The procedure is performed, leaving Hippolyte permanently disabled. Charles is devastated, fearing professional ruin, while Emma feels deep disgust toward him. She sees him as incompetent and weak, regretting ever believing in his potential. Emma and Rodolphe's affair reignites with renewed passion. She frequently sends for him, complaining about her miserable life with Charles. Over time, she becomes more obsessed with Rodolphe, treating their love like an escape. She starts dressing more elegantly, buying gifts for him, and going to great lengths to maintain their secret relationship. Emma's increasing expenses lead her to borrow money from Monsieur Lheureux, a cunning merchant who takes advantage of her carelessness. She buys lavish items, even a riding whip for Rodolphe, but struggles to pay off her debts. Meanwhile, her love for Charles turns into deep resentment, making Rodolphe the center of her desires. Eventually, she becomes desperate and begs Rodolphe to run away with her. He hesitates but plays along, allowing her to believe in the dream of a new life together. She begins making secret preparations, ordering a travel cloak, a trunk, and a bag, all while deceiving Charles and her mother-in-law. As their departure date approaches, Emma grows more emotional and excited, picturing a future filled with endless happiness. She believes she is about to escape her dull life forever. However, Rodolphe has second thoughts. On the night before their planned elopement, Emma passionately reassures him of her love, ignoring his subtle hesitation. Rodolphe reflects on the situation and realizes he cannot go through with it. The idea of exile, financial burdens, and the responsibility of taking care of Emma and her child overwhelm him. In the end, he decides to abandon her, calling himself an imbecile, but ultimately choosing his freedom over love. After abandoning Emma, Rodolphe sits down to write her a farewell letter. Struggling to find the right words, he goes through old love letters from past lovers, realizing that all his affairs have blended into a meaningless collection of memories. He ultimately writes a letter filled with false concern and poetic excuses, claiming their love would have faded over time and that he is leaving to spare them both pain. To make it more dramatic, he even adds a fake tear stain before sealing it. Rodolphe hides the letter under a basket of apricots and has his servant deliver it to Emma. When she receives it, she immediately senses something is wrong. Overwhelmed with dread, she rushes upstairs and reads the letter. Devastated, she contemplates suicide, standing at the attic window tempted to jump. However, Charles unknowingly interrupts her, calling her to dinner. At the dinner table, she is barely able to contain her grief. When Charles casually mentions that Rodolphe has gone on a trip, Emma realizes the finality of the betrayal and faints. Seeing a passing carriage, she recognizes it as Rodolphe's and collapses completely, causing chaos in the house. The local chemist, Homais, rushes in to help, offering absurd medical theories, but Emma soon falls into a deep fever. For weeks, Charles devotes himself to her care, abandoning his medical practice. She is bedridden and unresponsive, suffering from severe depression. Eventually, she begins to recover, able to sit up and even take short walks. However, when she looks into the distance, searching for something beyond her reality, she is overcome with dizziness. That evening, her illness returns, this time with more mysterious and severe symptoms, leaving Charles increasingly worried about her health and their financial troubles. Charles begins to struggle financially due to Emma's illness and extravagant spending. The merchant Lheureux pressures him into paying for unnecessary purchases and persuades him to take out a high-interest loan, further deepening his debt. However, Charles avoids thinking about how he will repay the money, choosing instead to focus on Emma's recovery. At the suggestion of the pharmacist Homais, Charles convinces Emma to take a trip to Rouen to see a famous opera singer, Lagarde. Though she initially resists, she eventually agrees. Dressed elegantly in a blue silk gown, she and Charles set off for the city, with Homais enviously wishing them well. Upon arrival, Charles becomes confused while trying to secure seats at the theater, running around town in disarray while Emma indulges in shopping. Their evening at the opera is about to begin. Emma and Charles arrive at the opera in Rouen. Emma is thrilled by the elegance of the theater and indulges in the fantasy of high society. During the intermission, Charles excitedly tells Emma that he has run into an old acquaintance, Léon, the young law clerk from Yonville, with whom Emma had shared an innocent but emotionally charged friendship years before. When Léon enters their theater box, Emma is momentarily thrown into a whirlwind of past emotions. Though she quickly composes herself, their old attraction is reignited. As the opera continues, Emma finds herself distracted, barely listening to the music, as she becomes increasingly preoccupied with Léon's presence. When he suggests that they leave for some fresh air, she readily agrees, and the three of them go to a cafe near the harbor. There, they discuss small matters, but the tension between Emma and Léon is palpable. Charles, unaware of the growing chemistry between them, casually suggests that Emma could stay another day in Rouen while he returns home. Seizing the opportunity, Léon enthusiastically supports the idea, hoping to spend more time with Emma. Though she hesitates at first, the thought of rekindling their past connection tempts her. As they part ways for the night, the stage is set for Emma to embark on a new affair. Léon, now more confident after his time in Paris, is determined to win Emma's heart. But at first, Emma resists, insisting they can only be friends. However, as their emotions intensify, she agrees to meet him the next day at the cathedral. The next morning, Léon carefully prepares, dressing impeccably and buying flowers for Emma. He arrives early at the cathedral, waiting anxiously. When Emma finally arrives, she hands him a letter, intending to end things before they go too far. But Léon grows impatient. As they leave, the beadle intercepts them, insisting on giving a long, tedious tour of the cathedral. Emma follows passively, using the distraction to delay the inevitable decision. At last, Léon, frustrated and desperate, takes her by the arm and hurries her away, calling for a cab. Once inside, Emma fully surrenders to her desires. The carriage drifts through the streets of Rouen for hours, its drawn blinds concealing their hidden passion. The coachman, bewildered and exhausted, wonders at their endless journey, while curious passers-by glance at the mysterious, shuttered cab. As night falls, the carriage finally stops in a quiet, secluded street. Emma steps out, her face veiled without looking back, a final symbol of her complete surrender to passion and infidelity. Emma returns home to find Charles heartbroken, but she feels only indifference. As he grieves, she pretends sympathy, but is secretly absorbed in memories of her affair. Even during dinner, she can hardly feign interest in Charles's sorrow. She finds him weak and uninspiring, contrasting sharply with the passionate Léon. Soon, Monsieur Leroux, the cunning merchant, visits Emma with a business proposition. He encourages her to take over Charles's financial affairs and sign a power of attorney, making her financially independent. She skillfully manipulates Charles into agreeing under the pretense of being helpful. Under this excuse, she arranges another trip to Rouen, ostensibly to consult Léon on financial matters, but in reality to continue their affair. Emma and Léon spend 3 blissful days together in Rouen, indulging in their affair as if on a honeymoon. They stay at the Hôtel de Boulogne, keeping their room dark and secluded, savoring every moment in each other's arms. Their days are filled with love, luxury, and leisurely outings. As their time together comes to an end, Emma carefully instructs Léon on how to send her letters discreetly, impressing him with her secrecy. But as he walks away, a doubt creeps into his mind. Why is she so insistent on securing a power of attorney? The thought lingers, hinting at her deeper hidden motives. Léon, now completely infatuated with Emma, becomes increasingly detached from his work and friends, consumed by her letters and longing to see her again. Meanwhile, Emma becomes even more entangled with the merchant Lheureux, who continues to sell her luxury items on credit, making her financially dependent on him. At the same time, She pretends to rekindle her passion for music as a cover for her secret trips to Rouen, where she plans to meet Léon. As her web of deception grows, Emma becomes more reckless, both in her spending and in her affair, unknowingly setting the stage for even greater troubles ahead. Meanwhile, Charles remains oblivious to Emma's double life, though he begins to notice inconsistencies. When he questions her about her music teacher, Emma fabricates receipts to cover her lies. As Emma's obsession with Léon intensifies, she disrupts his work schedule, pressures him to change his appearance. He becomes increasingly submissive, losing his independence to her overwhelming presence. Eventually, Charles grows suspicious when Emma fails to return home one night. In a panic, he searches Rouen for her, only to run into her in the morning. She lies effortlessly, calming his concerns. Emma's reckless passion, unchecked spending, and mounting lies create an illusion of happiness, but beneath it all, she is heading toward inevitable disaster. When money ran out, she borrowed from shopkeepers and pawned family heirlooms, desperately trying to maintain her extravagant meetings with Léon. He, however, began to tire of the affair, feeling trapped and weary of Emma's demands. He realized his feelings had faded but lacked the courage to leave her. Emma awoke to the harsh reality of her debts. The bailiff arrived at her home, making a detailed inventory of everything she owned. As the men searched through her belongings, she felt exposed, as if her entire life was being laid bare. That evening, she sat silently with Charles, guilt weighing heavily on her. Desperate for money, she traveled to Rouen, pleading with brokers and acquaintances, but no one would help. In her last hope, she turned to Léon, asking him for a large sum. Shocked by her request, he hesitated, claiming he would try. But Emma could see through his uncertainty. By the time she left him, she felt abandoned. The next morning, a notice was posted in the town square. Her furniture was to be sold. Humiliated, she turned to Monsieur Guillaumin, the notary, for a loan. He listened, but had no intention of helping. Instead, he made unwanted advances, pressing her into a situation that filled her with disgust. Furious and humiliated, she fled. Léon had promised to find the money. She sent the nurse to fetch him, waiting anxiously. Time passed, and fear crept in. When the nurse finally returned, her words shattered Emma's last bit of hope. Léon was nowhere to be found. Then, as if struck by lightning, a new thought flashed through her mind. Rodolphe. He had once loved her. He was wealthy. He would not refuse her. Clinging to this final desperate hope, she set off to find him, unaware that she was walking toward the very thing that had once filled her with anger. Emma wandered in desperation to Rodolphe's estate, hoping he would help her. As she approached, memories of their past love washed over her, and for a brief moment she felt the warmth of old emotions. When she finally saw him, she pleaded for a loan to save her from ruin. But Rodolphe, though once her lover, coldly refused. Her heart shattered. She accused him of never truly loving her, of leaving her in misery. Overcome with despair, she ran from the chateau, stumbling through the fields, lost in grief. Emma stumbled through the darkening streets, the world around her blurring into a twisted nightmare. Her breath came in short, desperate bursts as she pressed forward, her mind screaming for escape. The walls of the town seemed to close in on her, the weight of her fate crushing her chest. Then, an idea, sharp as a blade. The pharmacy. She quickened her pace, her steps unsteady as she reached the familiar door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and chemicals, bottles lining the shelves like silent witnesses to her desperation. Behind the counter, young Justin stood, his innocent eyes wide with surprise at her sudden arrival. "Madame Bovary?" His voice wavered. Emma forced a smile, her lips trembling. "Justin, I need something from the storeroom." He hesitated. "Monsieur Homais isn't here. She stepped closer, her voice lowering into a whisper smooth as silk. "I just need a little something. You trust me, don't you?" Her fingers brushed his wrist, her eyes locking onto his with a look that sent heat rushing to his face. Justin swallowed hard. He was just a boy, lost in the presence of a woman who seemed to glow with mystery and sadness. His hands fumbled for the key, and before he could think, she was already slipping past him, disappearing into the storeroom. The shelves loomed around her, filled with powders and potions, elixirs meant to heal, but one among them held the power she sought. Her frantic gaze darted over the labels until, there, arsenic. Her hands shook as she reached for the small container, her fingers curling around it as if it were salvation itself. A slow breath escaped her lips. This was it. This was her escape. Behind her, Justin's voice wavered. "Madame, what are you doing?" Emma turned, the bottle hidden in the folds of her dress. She smiled, soft, almost serene. "Nothing, Justin," she murmured. "Nothing at all." By the time she reached home, Emma's strength was fading. She staggered inside, her steps unsteady, the world tilting around her. The poison had begun its slow, merciless work. With a final trembling breath, she collapsed onto the bed. Her breath came in ragged gasps. A cold sweat drenched her body as waves of pain twisted through her. She clawed at the sheets, her fingers curling like dying petals. Her vision blurred, shadows stretching and dancing along the walls. Charles knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he pleaded, his voice cracking with terror. "Emma, speak to me. What have you done?" But Emma's world was already slipping away. A terrible fire burned within her, spreading like an unstoppable tide. Her body convulsed, first a shudder, then a violent tremor that made her cry out. Her lips parted, but no words came, only a strangled gasp. Her limbs stiffened, her back arched in agony, and then silence. The priest pressed the crucifix to her lips, whispering prayers, but Emma's eyes, wide with fear and madness, saw nothing. The poison was merciless, devouring her from the inside, dragging her toward the abyss. And then, from outside, a sound, a blind man's voice, singing in the empty street. The melody, eerie and off-key, drifted through the room like a ghost. Something inside Emma snapped. A strangled chuckle escaped her lips. Then another. The laughter grew, wild and unnatural, filling the air with something beyond despair, beyond reason. Charles recoiled, horror etched onto his face. The priest made the sign of the cross. The blind man's song continued, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding within. Emma's laughter reached a piercing crescendo, then stopped. Her head fell back. Her mouth froze in a final, breathless whisper. Her eyes, once filled with longing, stared into nothingness. She was gone. The house fell into a deathly silence. Charles still knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on Emma's lifeless face, as if refusing to accept the truth. His fingers brushed against her cold cheek, as if a single touch could call her back to life. But there was nothing left. No warmth, no hope, no future. His sobs started softly, then grew. A cry of heartbreak and despair, a pain pulled from the depths of his soul. Doctors arrived, tried, but there was nothing to be done. The priest whispered his final prayers, but his words were powerless against Emma's death. Later, a simple coffin was placed in the room. Charles sat beside it, hollow-eyed, wasted. Visitors came and went. Neighbors sighed, shook their heads, but none of them truly understood. The darkness that had consumed Emma was invisible to them all. On the day of the funeral, a soft rain fell. The coffin was lowered into the earth, and Charles, placing withered flowers over the grave, whispered under his breath, "Emma, why?" But only the cold soil answered. Weeks passed. Charles was no longer the man he once was. The house grew silent and empty. His eyes no longer sparkled, his shoulders hunched. At night, he sat beside Emma's empty bed, reading her old letters, the marks of dried tears on his face. One day, while searching through her belongings, he found a small box. Inside, a collection of letters from Rodolphe, letters from Léon. The truth, cruel and undeniable, lay before him. The affairs, the secrets, the lies. His hands trembled. He had never been enough for her. He had never saved her from her fall. His heart could not bear it. That same evening, they found him sitting in the garden, his head resting back against the chair, his heart no longer beating. In his hand was one of Emma's letters, his empty eyes still fixed upon her name. No one knew what would become of Bertha, their little daughter. At first, she was sent to stay with an aunt, but they were poor. In the end, she was sent to work in a cotton mill, where tired, frail children toiled from dawn till dusk. And so, Emma Bovary's name faded into oblivion. A whisper among quiet streets, a memory dissolving into time. In the distance, the blind man still sang. And that's the end of tonight's story. I hope this tale has brought you comfort and helped you drift into a peaceful sleep. If you enjoyed this bedtime story, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel for more relaxing stories every week. Wishing you a night full of sweet dreams. Good night.